Hello and welcome to this episode of Bush Footy Legends. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that this podcast is being recorded on the traditional lands of the Noongar people and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. The show is brought to you by Magic Studios and is presented by Country Football WA in partnership with Healthway, promoting the Think Mental Health message. For more information on the partnership or where to find support, make sure to check out the WA Footy Wellbeing Hub. The link is in the show notes. I'm your host, Jackson Barrett. Let's get into it. Premiership stories don't get much better than the one you're about to hear on today's episode. We were first introduced to the Albany Sharks on the podcast last season when we sat down with former Fremantle and St Kilda great Brett Peake. In its first 12 seasons, the Sharks won just 2 games, a long hard slog for players, coaches and administrators like President Tracy Blasco. This September, they became premiers for the first time. Tracy, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Have the premiership celebrations settled down? Are they still going? I think we're recording sort of 8 or 9 days later. What's it been like?
Yeah, they have finally died down. We had our wind-up on Friday and Saturday night, so I think after that everyone was a bit puffed after 7 days celebrating, but they certainly went hard for a few days, that's for sure.
Last weekend must have been pretty special for you. Can you, we'll talk more about the day a bit later, but just some of the emotions on Saturday night and how the club all took it in together?
It was incredible. It was, I think some of us, including myself, are still in a bit of disbelief, can't quite believe that we actually managed to pull it off. But it was just a reward for hard work for a lot of people over a number of years. So it was really quite gratifying to have that happen.
Hey, tell us about how the Albany Sharks started. So 2008, Albany's obviously town with like a long football history and lots of legends and some pretty established clubs. How did the Sharks come to be?
Well, it came, the first sort of discussions started in, I think it was August 2007, where they identified that there was another club needed just for juniors, because we had so many juniors like the Colts age group that needed a club to play for. So currently in town we had North Albany Railways, Royals, Mount Barker and Denmark as part of the GSFL, and I think back then also Kojonup, but they left a year after. So the need was identified, and then there was a series of meetings for anybody that was interested, you know, sort of in, I think, May 2008, and it wasn't until October 2008 that the Sharks Footy Club was actually incorporated. So it was a bit of a long process with a lot of meetings, a lot of chats, and a lot of people putting in their 10 cents worth on what we should be doing.
Did this club have a really strong junior base, given that it was sort of started with that in mind? Was that a real focus early days?
It was a focus early days, and that was all that we had. We only had our under-17s, it was called then, and Colts teams. We didn't have any senior teams because we just didn't have enough players, and it was hard enough getting a club off the ground. It takes a lot of work to pull a footy club together, and a massive amount of volunteer hours and time. So they did concentrate on the juniors, and the juniors were quite successful from the get-go, really. They were fairly strong.
What was recruitment like when senior teams did come into the competition? Was it heavily leaning towards guys that had played junior footy? Because it is hard to say, hey, we've got this shiny new club in a town that already has 3 or 4 of them. Was it a pretty young group early?
Well, it was, I think in 2010 was the first time we had a reserves team in the competition, and from all accounts, about 12 of those players had never played football before. So
okay, well.
It was a bit of a struggle to get numbers. And then it was a couple of years later, it was 2012 before we had a league side. So this club kind of developed from the leftovers, if you like, for want of a better word. Everybody sort of was aligned to a club, and they might have had a granddad or a dad playing at a club, so they were aligned to a club from an early age. And we had to sort of grab anybody else that was appeared interested in football and try and get them along at the Sharks and become a Shark.
I can imagine there were people working very, very hard behind the scenes to try and do that. Who were some of the people in the early days that pushed really hard?
Oh, there was amazing people like Brett Turpin, Alan Smallwood, John Stewart. There was a heap of foundation members that worked really hard, Jeff Oldfield, and a lot of those people have gone on to become past presidents and coaches, and still people that help out the committee to today. So it's been a big process, and they put in. I would hate to think. I know how many hours I put in a week, and the people that helped me out. So what they did to start it would have been incredible in the early days.
What was it? You sort of touched on it there, but what else was it that made the first years so tough? Because it was certainly a club that struggled for a long time, as the results sort of show.
Oh, absolutely. It was. We've always prided ourselves, I think, here at the Sharks that we've got people from all sorts of backgrounds. So we've got some of our players. This has been the only consistent thing they actually have in their life, coming down to training a couple of days a week and playing a game of footy. So they have some pretty terrible backstories of family life, and we encourage everybody to come down here. We'll give everyone a go. So trying to wrangle that sort of motley crew, I think, was difficult in the first few years. Also, the fact that we were getting absolutely thumped by 200 points a game. That's not good for anybody's mental health, and everybody plays football to enjoy it, and it's not enjoyable when you're getting an absolute thumping every week.
Yeah.
And then I know there were kids when my kids first started playing. It was not, you got laughed at if you played for the Sharks, and you got bullied at school because you're a Sharks player. So they went through a lot of heartache in the early years, and for a long, long time before we actually got a win on the board.
It's interesting that the club had that focus on bringing people that maybe don't have a lot going on outside of footy and making sure they're welcomed into the club. What sort of things were you putting in place? Was it a focus on like team dinners or things like that, or functions to keep people involved? Because, I mean, otherwise people, as you say, there's a serious risk that people just sort of drift off, right?
Yeah, I think in the early years we tried all of that, but it wasn't 100% successful. It was hard enough getting them down here to play the actual game, and to get them to come to events and for dinners and stuff. But it was tried. I know that there was Thursday night dinners from early on, but actually getting everybody to stay for that was another juggle. I think some of the early awards nights I went to, there certainly wasn't a packed house that was there, so it was a struggle to get to people to that as well. And we've obviously built on that in the last 15 years, and now we've got so many people coming for Thursday night meals, and we had to have two functions on the weekend. We had to have a juniors presentation and a seniors presentation because we've got so many people that want to turn up, so that's fantastic.
I read a story during the week where you said that at one point in the early years you were asked for an interview by a local journalist, and you basically said, I don't want to do a story about us being shit because everyone knows that we're no good. And it ended up being a story about the sort of family atmosphere at the club and it being a place that people enjoy coming. Was that... it's fascinating how you sort of find the balance between that, because as you say, football is more enjoyable when you're having some sort of success. So the effort that must have gone into keeping people invested and keeping people upbeat is pretty extraordinary.
It is extraordinary, and it's quite an extraordinary story, the whole Sharks story. I mean, there are people out there today going, oh, they want a premiership, what's the big deal? But they don't actually know the heartache that everybody went through to actually get that, first league premiership. It's just when the news reporter rang me and said, I want to do a story on the Sharks, and I said no thanks. And he said, why not? And I said, well, because we know we're a shit club, we know we're shit at football, we don't really need everyone to be telling us again. And he said, well, why are you still there? And I said, because the people are fantastic, they're like family. And he said, well, how about we do a story about that? So. And it was a great story, but I think the headline was still, is this Australia's worst football club? And when I first saw that, I was, it was like a red flag to a bull, and I thought, he's got it wrong. But actually the story itself was quite good, and it did say that we're all here because we're all great mates, we're all family now. We're a big, happy, extended family, and, all clubs have people that argue and stuff, but really at this club, I can honestly say at the moment, we might disagree, but we all move on and take each other's opinions, and so just a great place to be. And now that the season's finished, we're all sort of scratching around going, what are we going to do now?
We've all been stitched up by a headline writer once or twice. So the sort of years go on and still the wins aren't quite coming. And I guess certainly from the outside, the thing or one of the real turning points in the club is the signing of Brett Peake. So Brett was on the show last year. You can go back and listen to that. We spoke about his time at Fremantle, St Kilda, playing under Ross Lyon, all sorts of stuff. But we also spoke about just how passionate he is about the Sharks and turning things around. I think it was just before last year's grand final. Tell us about the impact that Brett had. Well, first of all, tell us how you ended up with this. I know he'd played a bit of country footy before, but how you ended up with this former Fremantle player landing at the Sharks.
Well, it's an interesting story actually, because he's got a mate. Obviously, he's been around football a long time, and he's got a mate who has played for one of the other football clubs down here in Albany. And I think they were at Coral Bay or something fishing and ran into each other. And his mate sort of said, "What are you doing for footy?" He said, "I'm not really sure. I'm sort of travelling around a bit with my family because he's got a young family." And he said, "Why don't you come down to Albany and why don't you help the Sharks?" So we sort of got his contact details from there and had a few phone calls. And one of the other, our football coordinator, Murray, and I went up and met him in Perth and sort of sounded him out a bit. And we were hopeful that we might be able to sign him up to come and play. But we thought, why is a guy of Brett's calibre going to take a chance on a club that hasn't had any wins? And it was quite incredible. It was a great conversation. At the end of it, I thought, it's almost like he's stitching us up here. He's saying all the right things. And he said, yep. He said, I'm in. And we were absolutely blown away. And what he's actually brought to the club, apart from his experience and his knowledge of football and the fact that the young blokes love being around him, is that he actually took a chance on a club that really wasn't winning any games. And the first year he was here, we struggled as well. So I think he probably thought, what have I bitten off more than I can chew down here? But he's been such a great asset to the club, such a great bloke. His family are a part of our family now, and we love having Brett, Asher and the kids around the club. It's just a really good story for all of us.
In a football sense, what sort of an impact has he had on in a leadership capacity, in lifting training standards? Is he the guy that's revving guys up to make it down to training, which in the early years wasn't a given for everyone? Is he sort of driving that, or is he more of a backseat guy? Is he a follow my lead sort of guy? How does he do it?
He's actually pretty. The way he goes about it is pretty quiet. Actually, in my opinion anyway, he's a leader on the field. And he certainly gets them G'd up when he kicks a goal and gets them all rallying and gets them all excited, and he lifts them. He's the guy that lifts us during a game. And when he doesn't play a game, if he's out for injury or something, we really notice that the guys struggle to sort of get excited about what they're doing. When it comes to training, it's just, his experience is just fantastic, because he shows the other guys. You can see him out there talking to the junior kids that actually get to play a league game, because we quite often have Colts that come up and play a few league games, and they just get so excited, particularly if they're in the forward line, to be out there with Peaky. And you can see him directing traffic while he's out there, telling them what to do, telling everyone where he wants them to kick the ball, and he can mark it and then he can shoot it through for a goal. So he's just really great to have around here, and he speaks really, really well when I've heard him speak to the juniors quite often about what it takes to play football at a high level, and the kids just hang on his every word. It's fantastic to have.
Does it blow your mind a little bit? One, the on-field stuff, like he's been doing it for so long and he's still league-leading goal kicker this year and among your best players and played really well in a grand final. But also the fact that he's still got this passion, like he's sort of done it all before. East Fremantle, St Kilda, he's won a flag at Bunbury, but the passion is still just like insatiable for him.
Oh, he loves footy. There's just no doubt about it. His whole family loves footy. And it is incredible to see. I know we had for the first time down here, we had all our games, or a game of the round, live streamed. And the commentators were talking about him in one of the finals, calling him a 38-year-old footballer. And I actually sent him a text message, said he's actually 40. He's out there running rings around people half his age. He's really fit this year, and he's had a good year and nearly no injuries. So it's been fantastic to watch him play.
How's the vibe around the club changed now that you're at the opposite end of the ladder? Is it still that really family orientated sort of place to be?
Oh, definitely. We could run around and get ahead of ourselves because we've won our first ever league premiership, and you know we are pretty chuffed with ourselves. There's no other way to describe that. But it still is that family club, and we still know we can't get ahead of ourselves. And you reach this where we get to play in our and win our first grand final. But we can't stop now. We've still got a lot of work to do. We've got to be able to sustain that. So 4 years ago actually, we were at the crossroads in this club where everything was just going pear-shaped, and a lot of our league players left all in the 1 year. We had sponsors, we had volunteers saying, look, we just can't do this anymore, it's all too hard. So we had a bit of a change in leadership and committee and coaches, and we had a coaching department all came together. A mob of guys or mates just came together and said, well, we want our kids to play at this club, so we're going to put in the hard work now before they're even of club age. They were playing junior footy still, and come up with a 5-year plan. So year 1 of the 5-year plan, the league won no games, and they probably all thought, what the hell have we done? Why have we committed to this club? Year 2, we reached our first final. Our league team reached the first final. We got knocked out the first round. Year 3, we got to the grand final and we got beaten. And year 4, which was this year, we won a grand final. So it's not a bad 5-year plan. I don't actually know what the 5-year plan is, to be honest. It's not written on paper anywhere. There's no magic formula, but it just happened. We've just got the right people at the club at the right time, I think.
I think those forward planning things at AFL level, you hear of them all the time, and they end up just being laughed at down the track. So it's really nice to hear one that's ahead of schedule, which is impressive.
Yeah, very ahead of schedule.
You mentioned sort of like the first year of that, or the year before that 5-year plan was put in place. Just how dire did it get? Did it get to a point where there were conversations with the league about, is this tenable? It sounds like the club was really on its knees.
Absolutely. I was surprised that we didn't shut the doors, to be honest. It was hard work because we're competing with clubs here that are having their 70th and 80th year celebrations. They've got, generations of people around their club and still around. You can see that when you play other teams, you can see that, the granddads and the grandmas come down and they've played football for the club. And we don't have any of that. We don't even have a true father-son to come through this club yet. So I think next year actually we'll have our first. So it's we were in a very dire position. We had a lot of meetings with the GSFL and all the other clubs said, we need the 6th team in the competition because we don't want to have a buy around, and we need the Sharks in the competition. And after many, many meetings and many suggestions of what we thought would help us, it got to the point where we put a bit of a presentation together to the Great Southern Footy League and said, look, this is what we think will help us, and we're just going to give it a crack. And we just got extra people involved, and all of them have got footy contacts and footy knowledge, and they've coached and they've played, and they were actually a tight group of mates as well. So when they sort of come in, I often say come in riding on their white horses. And one of them had a conversation with me. I'd been at the club for a while, and I was secretary for a while previous to that, and said, would you be happy to maybe step up and be the president of the club? I'd have to say, I think my first reaction was, I don't want to be the first woman to sink the ship, because I thought we were sinking fast.
Yeah.
And anyway, after probably one too many beers and a bit more talking, I said, oh, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then COVID hit. And COVID was actually a blessing in disguise for us because we had a shortened 10-week season, and literally anything that happened in that time, everyone blamed it on COVID. So we thought, oh, well, we can use COVID as a bit of a smokescreen here, and it actually allowed us to have more time to do a lot more planning behind the scenes and making more phone calls and trying to convince more people to come down and play footy for us. So it was actually a blessing in disguise.
It's a fascinating story because you hear of so many other football clubs that were really struggling during that season. I guess the 10-week season as well is if another club slips up once, the door sort of opens as well. And then 2022, you end up in a final. Can you remember the first final the club played in and the feeling around the club and just how special it was?
Oh, it's almost like a blur because it's almost like it's happening, but it's not happening. I think there's so many people have put so much time into this, and we're all so passionate about it. And I know, when we got into that first final, I was in absolute shock. I thought, my God, are we actually good enough? Or did we just actually jag that? And it hasn't been easy. They were close games, any of the finals that we've played. So, but the feeling of, we actually deserve to be here, we're as good as anybody else, was quite overwhelming, because when you've been told for such a long time that you're not a great footy club, and that you don't win any games, and this is all the reasons why people think you're not winning games, it's pretty hard to actually then prop yourself up and go, yeah, we are good enough, we actually deserve this. And I've actually struggled with that for the last week. I've literally laid in bed every night thinking about, did we actually do that? Did we actually win a league premiership? And the very first night, the day that we won it, by the time it was early hours of the morning when I got home, but I was laying there thinking, did that just happen? And did we fluke it? But I know in my heart that we didn't. I know that we've got a great playing group and they can play some great footy. But you still have that little bit of doubt when you've been around the club for a long time and have been here when things weren't as great as they are now.
Like yours, I think most good footy club presidencies start after one or two too many beers. The other person that sounded like it needed a bit of convincing is the senior coach, Jamie Ram. Tell us about how he came to be the senior coach and a few years later a premiership coach.
Well, I think people had been having the odd chat with Jamie a couple of years before he actually got here, and he was he's a farmer from out at Nyabing, and he wanted his son to play at a club like the Sharks. So it's funny that we all live in Albany, but most people that are actually involved with our football club are not Albany locals. So we've all sort of landed here at one time or another. So most of us are country people from the wheat belt or somewhere like that, and footy and sport is a lifeblood of your community. So that's just what we're used to. So the conversations we had with Jamie, I don't think he was that thrilled. I think he come down and he watched a few games and thought, God, this is a bit dire, this footy club. They're not tracking too well. And then he got to the point where he wanted somewhere for his son to play football. So a few of them, I think, again, got together, some of Jamie's mates, got together, they had a few beers, had a few discussions, come up with all these crazy plans and thought, right, we're going to do it. We need to do it now. And so there is a club for our kids to play at. And we've now just started recruiting their kids, through the draft. Jamie's son, Hudson, he was one of our 16s drafted to us this year. So it's great. We've got their families involved. We've got I think between them, the group of people that came in at the same time as Jamie, there was a ridiculous amount of sons between them. So almost a footy team worth of young men. So very exciting for us in a couple of years.
It's very handy. That's one way to recruit. Under Jamie, the 2022 grand final. So you mentioned the first final was just this complete blur, and then you make it all the way to a grand final, but you lose it to Railways. Are you one that sort of thinks, that's the one we had to lose? It's a pretty common phrase in footy, like we need to lose that, and then you get to this year and we've sort of been there, done that. Is that the case?
I think so, and I think people when you say, you got to lose one to win one, it doesn't help on the day that you've actually lost it.
No, it doesn't make you feel any better.
No, it doesn't make you feel any better at all. And there was tears. Some of our boys were in tears and I remember them saying to me, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And that night when we came back to the club, I said, if the next person that tells me they're sorry that we lost a grand final, I'm literally going to knock them out, because I'm so proud that we got to a grand final. I couldn't believe that we got there. And I probably in my heart thought, we're probably not ready to win one. We got there, and that was amazing enough. And I think we lost a grand final, and the boys probably partied for longer than when they won the grand final. So it's an interesting concept to this whole win one to lose one, and maybe it's true, because that's what we've just done.
So this year, the fun bit, 12 wins, 3 losses, minor premiers, but then the slip-up comes, you lose the first final. Tell us about the first final. So you lose to Railways, who beat you for the flag last year, and eventually you'd beat to win the grand final. Were you worried?
Yes and no. I think last year when they beat us in the grand final, we'd not beaten them before. So that's a big ask mentally for people to get over that hurdle, because I think some of our boys went and said, oh, we've never beaten them before, so we're not going to beat them today. And for 3/4 in that first grand final we played them, we kept up to them, and then they just, experience run over the top of us in the last quarter. But for this year, I think, you win one, you lose one, you win one, you lose one. We're like, that's okay. We can't be on point all the time, and it's, what it's like. It's good. It's a good lesson, I think, sometimes if you go in a little bit cocky and you come out and you get slammed and you go, okay, well, actually we're not as good as we think we are. So pick yourself up the next week and try again. And that's kind of what the boys have done, every time they've had a loss this year.
So a win over Royals in the prelim. Tell us about Grand Final Day. What does Grand Final Day look like for a country footy president? Are you up at the crack of dawn and at the club?
Yeah.
What was the morning like?
Yeah, definitely up at the crack of dawn. I think we Barker's only half an hour away, but we left at 6 o'clock to get there so we could park and unload everything and settle everyone down. And we had our 16s playing in the first grand final as well, and they won that on Grand Final Day. So that got us off to a good start. It was all very exciting, and it's great to watch all the young fellas play in a grand final. They're just, full of nerves, and parents are nervous, and there's a bit of a buzz. And then we didn't have anyone in for the Colts, so we kind of all stood around and watched the Colts game. And then we had our Resi's team played a grand final. Unfortunately, didn't come away with a win, so it was a pretty constant day. And then by the time the league boys run out, I think it was almost, well, for me, it was almost a relief for the final bounce. I thought, right, we're underway, because we were waiting all day for this to happen. For me, I'm renowned for pacing during the league matches. I get really, really nervous and pace up and down and sort of walk off by myself. I'm not very good at playing with others when I'm nervous. And but on Grand Final Day this year, I had no nerves at all. I was the calmest I've been for the whole year, which actually was more unsettling than actually being nervous. And I kept thinking, what's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. But I actually thought they had it. I thought, this is it. This is our time. They learnt last year. They lost last year. They've learnt from that, and they're hungry for it this year. And I had faith in their ability, because they're a talented bunch, and we've got a really young league side, apart from Brett, of course. He's like the granddad of the side. But the rest of the boys are sort of average age, 20, 21, 22. So they're young and fit, and I was supremely confident that we were going to get it, and we actually did.
There's an amazing picture of you. I think it's on the ABC, of you sort of like slumped over on your knees after the siren. Was that just like joy, relief? How do you sort of sum that moment up?
It was, I don't know whether I'd call it an amazing photo. It's a bloody terrible photo. But certainly it's full of emotion. I'll give you that. I got to the point, I was standing on the sidelines, and because they got within 5 points of us in that last quarter, and I thought, oh, geez, the boys are going to give it away. And I thought, no, they've got it. And I sort of steadied myself. And then I reckon in the last 4 minutes, I just started shaking uncontrollably. And I thought, oh, my God, I actually think we're going to win it. And my legs just wouldn't hold me up. So I fell to the ground. And I remember hearing someone behind me saying, oh, my God, Tracy's down. So I think my son thought I'd had a heart attack or something. He's like, you're right, Mum. And I just couldn't stop sobbing. I thought, my God, we've actually done it after all these years, and all these people that have put in so much work and so much heartache to get us where we are today. It's reward for every one of them. It's just fantastic.
What are the conversations like with the people like yourself that have dedicated so much and worked so hard early days to get the club to where it is? What are those conversations like, maybe after a couple of drinks, maybe after the final sign, with people that you've shared so much with?
There's still a lot of people keep saying to me, has it sunk in yet? And I don't actually think it has. I know what's happened, but I think it's going to be, I don't know, weeks or months before I actually realise what has happened. That's how much it meant to people. And immediately after the game, once I'd sort of realised what had happened, and it was quite incredible. People ran onto the field, and I don't remember any of that. I just remember probably sobbing in the corner because we won a grand final. But seeking out the people in the crowd that have been at the club for years or were at the club years ago, and just seeing their faces and just going up and hugging them and just saying all of it was worth it. That's the most magical thing about the whole thing. It's just, I keep saying, it's reward for everybody, for people, for the players, for the committee, for the ex-coaches, for the sponsors. People that pour money into a club that don't win games of footy. That's a big ask. So it's reward for everybody, and it's just a fabulous feeling to have.
Another one of the nice stories that came out afterwards was that when Jamie put the magnets up on the board pre-game, his starting midfield were all Sharks juniors, including your son, Bryce. That must have been nice as well, because that's how the club started and what it was all about, to then have these guys come through and be the sort of main characters on the day, so to speak.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it's we've lost players along the way. They've said, we've had enough. We want to go and play for another club where we can win some games. But to have the core group of Sharks boys that have played their junior footy here actually to run out in the grand final was fantastic. And of course, if I put my mum hat on, I was just super, super proud that my son was back at the club and could be part of it as well. And it was just a joy to watch.
What's next? Can you keep this group together now that it's a premiership side? And do you think there's the sort of hunger and the drive to do it all again?
I definitely think they're already talking themselves up, saying that they're going to do it again next year. It's amazing how success breeds a little bit of success, and people want to be here. I don't think we're really losing much of our playing group, because we have quite often a very transient core group of people. We have people that come. We end up with a lot of med students, a lot of doctors that play for our club, but they're only down here on rotation for a short amount of time. But I don't think we're going to lose too many at all, and I think we'll probably, for the first time, truly have a few people wanting to come and play at the club, just to jump on board and get involved. So that'll be interesting to see how the numbers look when we start up pre-season next year.
And are you going to hang around as president for a little bit longer?
If they'll have me, I will. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love it. I got at a stage in life now where footy's just about pretty much taken over everything else. Even my day-to-day job, I think they know that they're probably truly a major sponsor of the Sharks Footy Club, without being a sponsor. So something that gets laughed about down here quite often. But yeah, love it. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else with any other people, and struggling. I'll start struggling in the next couple of weeks because it's the off season, but luckily we've got a women's team to start pre-season in November and other things to get on board. And I had a conversation this morning with the coordinator of the footy, and we were just talking about getting together this week and looking at the ins and outs and see where we are and what sort of gaps we need to plug for the next season.
Beautiful, Tracy. It's an amazing country footy story, which we obviously love here, and it's one that through Brett was sort of followed for a little while. So thrilled to see you get it done, and hopefully the club can stay successful for quite some time. And thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having us. It's been a blast. I'm really enjoying talking about the club in the last week. It's been really good.
Thanks, Tracy. Cheers.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bush Footy Legends. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you like, follow and share it with your mates. Make sure you check in on them while you're there. For tips and advice on how to look after yourself, your family and your mates, visit thinkmentalhealthwa.com.au. Get in touch with us through our Instagram page at WA Country Football, or if you want to suggest a guest, email us at wafc.com.au. If you're after more, stay tuned. We'll have an episode dropping every week.